The demo's done, and it's about time too. The main games come out very, very soon, and my run of Pokemon, it will be on Alpha Sapphire, will be beginning shortly. But this is not going to be exactly a normal run. Since this is a remake, I can't really do a blind run like I did in X and Y because, well, I pretty much already know all the cities and all the routes and pretty much all the major trainers' teams anyway. But what I can do is maybe something a little bit of a challenge. This is going to be my Pokemon Alpha Sapphire challenge run. And as much as I would love to do no experience, that is of course not really possible. So, after much deliberation, I have come up with a set of rules that I think should be quite interesting. I've tried them out on a few other games and they seem to work just fine and actually could be quite fun to watch. So, let's get this out of the way. The rules of this challenge are primarily based on the Wedlock challenge invented by Maryland. Now, a lot of the rules here are going to be the same as the ones that he uses, but some of them have been changed. I'll put a link in the description to the actual Wedlock rules video. I recommend you go and read that, because he explains a lot of the rules far better than I could in the limited time that I have. Basically, every rule of the Wedlock challenge applies except for Rules 1 and Rule 5. Rule 5 is getting a few modifications, but Rule 1 is completely out. Basically, the Wedlock challenge is a variation on the popular, in my opinion overly popular, Nuzlocke challenge, and, well, basically it forces your Pokemon to fight in pairs, and you're only allowed to use one pair in each battle. You're only allowed to switch between two of them unless they both faint. So this leads to a lot of strategic decisions where you have to think quite hard about which Pokemon that you send in to, say, a gym battle, because you'll only be allowed to use two and you're not able to freely switch between your party. And with that, it also comes with the Nuzlocke encounter rules, which I actually have tried earlier and I found quite fun. Basically, I'm only allowed to catch the first Pokemon that I find on each route that isn't a duplicate. So, yeah, there is going to be dupes clause because, let's face it, no one wants to do a run where their entire party ends up being Zigzagoons and Pidgeotters. That is just not interesting for anyone. However, the Wedlock does have some exceptions with the first encounter rules to do with gender. Basically, if your party has an imbalance of genders, the next Pokemon you catch has to be the gender that you have less of, until eventually you have a party of 3 males and 3 females, which form 3 one male, one female pairs, and those are your sort of pairs that you have to do. And part of the challenge of the Wedlock rules is that you have no real control over what Pokemon end up paired together, so you could be stuck with huge type weaknesses, or you could have, let's say, your starter being paired with an early game crappy Pokemon, and be stuck like that for a while. So it's actually pretty interesting, and it adds a lot of interesting dynamics to the game. Now, speaking of first encounter rules, something that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire do a little bit differently is Dex Nav. I think, from what I've seen of trailers, I'm going to agree that Dex Nav is banned. I am not allowed to use Dex Nav at all, because it effectively lets you see the next Pokemon that you're able to encounter, and effectively, part of the rules of the first encounter thing is to make it so that you have no control over what Pokemon you get, and you're forced to use Pokemon that might be a bit out of your comfort zone. Dex Nav kind of ruins that, and so Dex Nav is not allowed. But the second main rule of all Nuzlocke challenges is one that, well, I'm actually not a very big fan of for several reasons, and that's why this rule does not apply for this challenge. And I want to stress this right now. There is going to be no death in this challenge. When Pokemon reach 0 HP, they're fainted and that's fine, and there are going to be some restrictions over how they can be revived, but they are not gone forever. I tried out an actual vanilla Wedlock in Leaf Green a while ago just to test out these rules, and the results were interesting. I really enjoyed the whole not knowing what you're going to get first encounter rules, but I really did not find death to be fun, interesting, or challenging at all. Most of the quote-unquote challenge that comes out of death is just pure luck, and I really don't like that kind of thing. I've seen a lot of good, well, not a lot, but I've read Nuzlocke comics, a lot of them, and I've seen a lot of Marilyn's playthroughs, and I've done one of my own, and I can conclude the following. If you are a decent player, all of your deaths, well, 90% of your deaths are going to be due to critical hits and cheap hacks and stuff like that. Let me just give you a case in point. So, my Leaf Green Wedlock ended with 10 deaths in total. Let's run through them quickly, shall we? Crit! Crit! Zubat's early game learn set sucks. Double kick crits me on the switch in, I activate Poison Point, double kick crits me again, Poison Point finishes me off. Yes, that exact sequence of things happened, and if even one of those didn't happen, Momoko would still be alive. When that happened, from that moment, I knew I was never doing a Nuzlocke again. Crit self-destruct. No, I am not exaggerating. And I did some damage calculations, and it's possible that Kamenosuke may have survived if that wasn't a crit. I'd also like to mention that I knew this guy had self-destruct, I correctly predicted that he had it, and I attempted to avoid it with Dig a couple of times. He never used it when I used Dig. I switched to Kamenosuke, he uses it immediately. Again, nothing but luck. Sludge Bomb happens to poison me after I get down to 3 HP. Now, this is partly my fault because I did get screeched earlier and I probably should have switched out. But it still stands that if that didn't get the poison hacks, there wouldn't have been a death there. Forgot Earthquake hits you while you're digging. Now, this one is totally my stupidity. I was a complete moron and I completely deserve this. This may have been the only one that was completely my fault. Crit! Crit! And explosion. And if you watch some of Marilyn's Nuzlocks, you can see that's the general theme too. The vast majority of his deaths, definitely more than 80%, tend to be due to critical hits. And it's just something that I don't like. Personally, I'm not against critical hits in general, or luck in Pokemon really. But it's the fact that you can potentially lose something permanently due to something completely beyond your control that I feel is much too harsh of a punishment, and I don't think it's legitimate difficulty. Also, contrary to what a lot of people seem to think, the threat of death did not make me bond with my Pokemon more. If anything, I cared about them less knowing they could die any moment. I tend to bond with my Pokemon much more during regular playthroughs when I know they'll be with me the whole game. But anyway, that's enough about that. So yes, that rule is completely out. But all the other Wedlock rules apply except for Rule 5, which is going to have some slight modifications that I'll point out later. Rule 5 of the Wedlock states that you're not allowed to deposit anything into the PC. In my case, this rule is going to be active most of the time, except for one time when I get to do that, and I'll explain that a bit later. Now, here are my extra rules that I'm adding on top of this. The first rule is, you are only allowed to use each Pokemon Center once, with one exception. So basically, you get to a town, you can't just go and heal the Pokemon Center immediately. You can't heal at Pokemon Centers repeatedly. Every Pokemon Center or otherwise healing point, such as your mother, can only be used once, and that's it. No more using that heal point for the rest of the game. This is going to make training somewhat interesting, and it might mean that I'm not going to restrict the experience share completely, but it does make things a bit interesting. You can't just go and heal the Pokemon Center whenever you want. However, I've seen challenges that use this rule, and it's usually not such a big deal if you can buy as many potions as you like. Well, I'm going to fix that. Additional rule number 2. No buying healing items from Pokemarts at all. Healing items are allowed, but you can only use healing items that you actually pick up on the ground or are given. So you really have to manage your resources here, and you really have to think carefully before you use a potion. Even revives are going to be a very limited resource, so we've got to be careful about those. So yes, no buying healing items ever. Now, we are allowed to buy Pokeballs, and any type of Pokeball is fair game to be bought. Repels and escape ropes I'm also going to allow myself to buy purely for convenience reasons. But X items, nope, I'm not going to allow those. I may even not allow using X items that I've found on the ground. A note about this regarding berries. Technically, berries aren't bought at stores, so you'd think that, you know, they could be allowed to be used too, and I'd say berries are fine. However, you are not allowed to replant berries. You may pick berries once, but no replanting them ever. At least this is assuming that berries work like they did in the original games. If they worked like the way they did in X and Y, with trees where berries just restore themselves each day, you're only allowed to pick one berry from each tree per game. And where there is a berry growing area, no growing berries ever. And now it's time for the third rule, and this one's kind of interesting because the lack of death means that Pokemon are actually stuck with their designated partners for the entire game, with nowhere to change them. And if I still had the no depositing Pokemon into the PC rule, well, that would mean that any Pokemon I catch after the first 6 is essentially pointless because I'll never be able to use them. So, I've implemented this rule. This is what I like to call the pit stop rule. After defeating every gym leader, I get to do the following. I get to heal at the nearest Pokemon Center. I've tried this challenge before, and I personally find that not giving you a free heal after each gym is a bit of a problem. It makes things just a bit too difficult, and 2, it actually encourages losing battles on purpose just to get healed, which is really not in the spirit of this challenge. So, yeah. Now, the second thing I get to do with my pit stop is, after this heal, I am allowed to use the PC once. During this visit, I may, if I choose, only if I choose, so I get the option whether to do this or not, I may switch out one breed pair in my team for one pair in the PC. Yes, the whole pair has to be switched out. I must replace both Pokemon in the pair or none at all. No breaking up pairs whatsoever. Also, if the new pair is going to be picked from just 2 Pokemon that are arbitrarily in the PC, they have to be of opposite genders, and once those 2 are picked, they are paired for the remainder of the entire game, no splitting them up. If I deposit them later, they still remain paired. So that's basically it. Those are my rules for this challenge. It should be pretty interesting. Again, I've tested this challenge in a few other games, and it seems to be relatively fine. One corollary though, the experience share. Now, it's been confirmed that, sadly, the experience share is going to work the same way it did in X and Y, which is very annoying. Which means it's horribly broken, probably. Now, normally I would say ban the experience share entirely, however, in testing this challenge, I found a few interesting things to have happened. Oftentimes, if a Pokemon faints during training, it has a very hard time catching up. And usually what this means is that when a Pokemon falls behind, it's almost impossible for it to catch back up, and it's basically stuck being dead weight forever. Now, because of this, I may allow the experience share very briefly while certain Pokemon are still too low level to effectively battle. I'm going to use it maybe to temporarily boost said Pokemon up to a usable level, and then it's being turned off immediately. However, I am also introducing a level limit. If at any time any of my Pokemon goes above the level of the next gym leader, then that Pokemon is not allowed to be used in battle ever. Yeah, so I need to be very careful about how I use the experience share, or I could render them kind of unusable. Of course, once the gym leader is defeated, if the Pokemon's a lower level than the next gym leader, then it's still allowed. But basically, any Pokemon that are higher level than the gym leader's highest level Pokemon are not allowed to be used against that gym leader, period. And, well, that's basically it. So, these rules sound kind of interesting, I hope you enjoy, and I guess I'll see you once I actually get the game and start playing. Looking forward to it, I hope you are too.